Hello, and welcome to Bengal Bites, the podcast where we satisfy your craving for Cincinnati Bengals news analysis from an unfiltered, real point of view. I'm your host, Derek. This is episode 0. This is the pilot episode, the first episode ever. Hello, world. It's nice to see everybody and meet everybody out there. I guess you're listening. I can't see you. But before we even get this show started and get into the upcoming 2023 NFL season and the 2023 Bengals season, I want to lay out a little bit of a groundwork for the show to let you know who, why, what, how, all the questions about what you might want to know about this show before we even get into it. So, first of all, why am I even making this show? Well, first of all, I love football. And if you're a football lover, then hopefully this show is going to be for you. But beyond that, I love media consumption. Like, I just love consuming all kinds of media about football, podcasts, YouTube, analysis, all kinds of football content. So those two things are really what I wanted to bring together in this show. Now, why did I feel like I needed to make my own show? There's so many other shows out there, and there's tons of shows about the Bengals and football in general, and they all do a great job. So there's something that I felt like I could add. But a lot of the shows, the people are on the Bengals payroll. So I guess to put that right out in front, this show is not affiliated with the Cincinnati Bengals whatsoever. I have no affiliation with the team, no affiliation with the NFL. I'm not sponsored by any corporations. I'm not brought to you by anybody. So there's nobody else. I'm completely independent. These thoughts are all my own. I am not a lawyer, but I play one on this podcast. Okay. So just to get all that out of the way, I have no affiliation with the team. So that means I can bring you a real perspective. I feel like when I listen to a lot of the podcasts that are from people, produced by people with the team, they have to give you the team narrative. They have to give you the team line to keep you interested. They can't tell you that the star player is going to be hurt and out the rest of the season, because then everybody's just going to tune out, not buy tickets to the game anymore, not pay attention. So they can't really tell you the truth. As much as they can give you that close-up access and interviews with the players and insights with the coaches, which is great, we can't get that kind of access anywhere else. And so I appreciate that, but you have to take it with a grain of salt. Their perspective is a lot biased, not just a little bit biased, but it's a lot biased. So you've got those shows, and then in some of the other podcasting world, you've got people who, the beat writer reporters, basically. This is their job. This is their career. They podcast whether they want to or not. So sometimes it feels a little contrived. It feels like they're not really that interested in telling you about what's going on. It feels like they're podcasting with a gun to their head. And for me as a listener, I don't want to have to feel like I'm being listened to somebody who's forced to podcast. That's not why I'm here at all. I'm here because I want to be here for you, the listener. I want to inform you. I want to entertain you. I want to get you excited about the upcoming Bengals season. We're going to go through the whole season every step of the way. I'm going to give you the news, the game previews, the game reviews. I'm going to get all that from a unique perspective that I don't think hasn't really been hit yet so far. So one more thing. There's also a lot of stats, I feel like, in some other podcasts. So we will look at some stats, but I'm not going to get too much into analytics. And those things can be helpful, but I feel like it distracts from the just general enjoyment of watching the game. Like, the players aren't running down the field with a calculator in their hand and an abacus and a protractor and like measuring all these angles and doing all these calculations. It's just a game. You're just out there running around playing it. So I'll get into a little bit of my experience, but you don't get too wrapped up in the numbers. And I think a lot of people, when I listen to them on their shows, they go into so much detail about the statistics and the PFF grades and the rankings and which player is in which tier. I feel like they lose sight of the bigger picture of who won, who lost. That's the most important thing. Like Joe Burrow has been quoted, I think, at some of his press conferences. Like, he doesn't care if he throws 100 yards and they win the game. That's better than him throwing for 500 yards and they lose the game. He would obviously much prefer to win the game. It doesn't matter what the statistics are. It doesn't matter what his quarterback ranking or quarterback rating was or passer rating was in the game, as long as they won. Like, that's the most important statistic, as they say. And let's remember, Zach Taylor, despite his recent success, still has a losing record as an NFL head coach. So there's still some things we need to see from him and from this team before I'm going to be fully convinced that this is going to be the dynasty that we hope it is going forward. But some other things, one thing that I noticed in a lot of just general NFL media talking heads, there's so much talk about the quarterback position. Oh, the quarterback is so important. The quarterback is the most important position in football, the most important position in professional sports. And we've got all of these shows about the quarterback, this, and let's analyze the quarterback, blah, 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 quarterback. And when they promote the shows, it's all about, it's Joe Burrow versus Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow versus Justin Herbert. It's not like Joe Burrow is going out to the 50-yard line every week and like dueling these guys or having like a fist fight, with Patrick Mahomes. It's like Tiger Woods says, like, it's not like he and Rory McIlroy are going to go out and hit each other with their golf clubs. It's not a literal one-on-one battle. It's you versus the entire other team, your team versus the entire other team. It's a team game. So while the quarterback is one of the players on the field, there's also 21 other players on the field at the same time that are also participating in the game. So I feel like people really lose sight of that and neglect to analyze anything outside of the quarterback play. So you get, if a podcast is 30 minutes long, you get 25 minutes talking about the quarterbacks, and then and then the defense, they were pretty good. They had like 3 interceptions and a touchdown, whatever. So it's like, wait, I think maybe the more important thing was the defense instead of the quarterback there, but for whatever reason, and, maybe that's what people click on. That's what people are interested in. If the casual fan, I understand the casual fan out there doesn't know all of the players on the team. Obviously, they know the star players, which is usually going to be the quarterback, face of the franchise, the person that you see on all the media. I get it. If you're a casual fan, I'm going to be honest with you, this show might not be for you, because this show is going to be for hardcore podcast junkies. If that's me, that's the show that I want from a Bengals podcast. So that's a long-winded way of saying I feel like there is an opportunity out there for a podcast with a little bit more unique perspective, because a little bit more in depth, that's not looking at the game from a superficial perspective. I want to get from a player's perspective. Not that I played professional football, but getting into that. Why am I doing this podcast? Who am I? Well, I said I'm Derek, but beyond that, why are you even listening to me make this podcast? Okay, well, I was born and raised in Ohio, but unlike a lot of people who do Bengals podcast, I was not a Cincinnati native. I grew up in the northwest corner of Ohio. So if you know the geography of Ohio, and even if you don't, Cincinnati is so Ohio, they call it the heart of it all. It's shaped like a big heart, kind of. So I'm up in the northwest corner of the heart. Cleveland is in the northeast corner. So Cleveland is several hours away from me. Let's not define several right now. Let's say a few. Cleveland is a few hours away from me. And then Cincinnati is in the southwest corner of the state, so another opposite corner of the state. So it's a few hours away. So both of these teams, when I was growing up, were not close to me. But for whatever reason, the Browns fan base always seemed to dominate. Nobody was a Bengals fan. And even growing up, some of my earliest childhood memories were sitting on weekends watching football with my dad in the recliner when I was 3 years old, 2.5, 3 years old. We would sit there and I would listen to him watch the game, yell at the game. And he was a big Browns fan because, shocker here, I'm a little bit old. I was to say I'm an old man and I'm getting older. So I'm not that old, but if I keep doing this podcast long enough, I'll be an old man. So anyway, he grew up in the 40s and 1940s and 50s, last century. And this is when the Browns were like, they had Jim Brown and there were Marion Motley and like all the integrated championships that the Browns were winning. And so, I'll give him a pass. Fine. He was a Browns fan. But of course, when you're a young boy, you have to be a little a-hole antagonist. So after a few years watching the Browns games with my dad, and he would always get frustrated with the Browns. And then if they were playing the Steelers, that was a big game, so I would get excited. And so I would root for the Steelers because, again, don't hold it against me. I was a stupid kid. I would root for the Steelers because my dad rooted for the Browns, okay? But the other thing was the Steelers just had cooler uniforms. When I looked at the Browns, they were brown, and most of the time, because in Cleveland, the field was completely covered in mud anyway, so there was brown already, and then whatever wasn't brown was covered in mud. So they just like this brown, gross-looking team. The Steelers at least had some black, tough, and a little bit cooler than the Browns. So as a stupid kid, I rooted for the Steelers, but that quickly changed. I want to say probably my first, like Jeff Blake and Carl Pickens, the Shake and Blake era. That was what really converted me from being anything resembling a Browns fan to Bengals 100%. Because, when I got into school, a lot of the kids were wearing Browns gear at school, and the teachers were talking about, the Browns, and it was the Battle of Ohio was a big thing. Browns versus Bengals, it's the big matchup. And so a lot of the kids wanted to go Browns. Of course, I had to go Bengals. So that's kind of where my Bengals fandom kicked off. And then I played football for 13 seasons, organized from the time I was 9 years old to the time I was 21. So I played like little midget league football. I was running up and down, scoring 4 touchdowns a week on those kids. They didn't know what to do. And then when I got to high school, look, it's a team game, like I said, okay? And when people hear that I only won 4 games in my entire high school career and that my senior year we went 0-10, they were like, "Oh, you must have been garbage at football." Well, it's a team game. And it's not an excuse, but we only had legitimately about 35 players on the varsity roster my senior year. And after a few injuries, we had 30 guys. So it's when we're playing teams that had 60 players at other schools, it was a war of attrition. I was playing every single play on offense and every single play on defense, and I was the punter and the kicker and doing kick returns and special teams, and we had a lot of guys on the team that had to play every single play. So it was hard, but I also got a lot of experience playing the game and understanding the game from a lot of different angles. I played, when you're a little kid, you want to play tailback. And when I was growing up, I used to watch not just the Bengals, but I used to watch Ohio State. Because when you live in Ohio, Ohio State is the biggest thing, especially in the 90s. People would say, "Oh, what team do you root for?" It's like, I watch college. I watch the Buckeyes, Ohio State. Let's not talk about the 90s and professional football in Ohio. It was a grim, dark era. We'll get back to that later. But anyway, yeah, so Ohio State. So, you had people like Robert Smith and Eddie George and Bobby Hoying and Joey Galloway and Terry Glenn and David Boston even. Lots of, Andy Katzenmoyer and guys like that who are just, in my mind at the time. I was a little kid. Like, these are my icons, my heroes, these guys. And, now thinking about it, these guys are like 21, 20 years old. But in my mind, they were grown men. They've got hair on their face and muscles. Oh, my goodness. So, yeah, needless to say, it's just, I had a long love of the game. And I took that and had a little bit of success in high school, enough to put together a highlight tape to send out to a few schools. And I ended up playing in the Ivy League at Princeton, like one of our draft picks. And I was a 4-year wide receiver there. I started my last 2 years. I didn't really do anything that spectacular. I had a few good catches, a few good runs. I had a few tutties. I guess my claim to fame would be I did score a touchdown against a current NFL general manager. So I'm not going to say, you could probably, if you know me, you could guess who it is. But my first touchdown that I ever scored in college came against a NFL general manager for a team. So when I see him in the news up at the podium introducing new players that he signed and trades that he made and all this kind of stuff, I just have to laugh. Like, I got you that one time. And we won the game. We did win the game. So my touchdown was not in vain. But anyway, you don't care about me or whatever. But the point is, I feel like I have a little bit of a unique perspective because sometimes I listen to other shows. I'm not going to name any specific shows. And I don't want to dump on any other shows because they all do a great job. But sometimes when I hear them break down the game, they don't have their perspective. And sometimes I feel like it's missing something. So I want to give you a little bit of a unique perspective. And if anybody is from Cincinnati, you don't have to be from Cincinnati necessarily, but one of the things that got me hooked on the Bengals was the radio station in Cincinnati, WLW AM 700, the big one. And that's the official radio of the Reds and the Bengals. And it's got to be one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful radio stations in the country. Broadcasts out 50,000 watts, 24 hours a day, and you can hear it crystal clear. I don't know how many hundreds of miles away. I can hear it any time of day, no problem. And as far as I know, it's the only station that I can get like that. So, maybe I can get a Cleveland station, but definitely get Cincinnati. So all the media, all the news we got from the 90s when radio was big. And also, I don't know if you remember the Gary Burbank show. Just for Cincinnati people, they might get that. But Gary Burbank, he was one of my huge influences growing up. If you remember Earl Pitts, real American, you know what makes me sick. You know what makes me so angry. Anyway, Gary Burbank was a legend. Still is in my mind. But so I wanted to do kind of a radio show. This is obviously an audio only show right now. Video, maybe down the road, maybe some guests, maybe another co-host. But for right now, it's just going to be a solo audio only podcast. Part of the reason is because video editing is hard and time consuming and makes my computer 200 million degrees. So it's just a lot easier to do an audio only podcast for right now. So anyway, let's get into a little bit more about the Bengals. So this radio station, like I said, my dad was a big Browns fan when I was growing up. And so the Bengals were never a big thing in our household. Football was a big thing, but the Bengals, not so much. Until there was one winter night, we were driving around, my dad and I, we went to Blockbuster. I guess my dad wanted to rent a movie or whatever, something to take his mind off of the fact that the Super Bowl was going on at the time. So we were in the car and we got out of Blockbuster, and he must have just had the radio on AM 700 just by default. and it was the Super Bowl. It was the Bengals playing the 49ers in the Super Bowl. And I was like, Dad, what is this? Some kind of football game, but it's not the Browns, which was confusing because it was a game at night, which I was not used to because usually the Browns played at 1 o'clock. And it wasn't the Browns. It was some other team called the Bengals, but they were in Cincinnati, and they had this guy named Boomer Esiason, I think. And I was just totally confused by the whole thing. But, obviously I found out later about the team, and all I knew that it wasn't Bernie Kosar. And that sounded pretty good to me. So after I got out of college, I still had all this knowledge from watching. Because when you play the game, half of the time you spend practicing. I mean, the game itself is only a minuscule part of what actually goes into making it all happen. You get so much preparation. There's so much planning. There's so much game planning and strategizing. You're watching film. You're watching film of practice and then going out to practice and then practicing again and then watching the film of the practice. And it's just this constant cycle over and over, self-improvement, analyzing yourself, your own tendencies, how you need to improve, adjust, make corrections, and what to expect when you go out there and face an opponent. And, it's a lot that goes into it, from the coaches to the players. I was never a coach, so I don't have the background or the experience to speak on it from a coach's perspective. That, somebody else can make a podcast about that. I'm trying to give you a player's perspective because that's what I know best. So obviously, Ocho Cinco, as a wide receiver, I just love watching Ocho Cinco. As soon as I got out of college, because that kind of synced up with when I was out, and just looked at Chad and his footwork. I mean, everybody knows he's got the footwork, the quickness, the hands, the body control. It was unbelievable. And then on top of that, the entertainment factor, making it fun. He wasn't just a robot out there, hand the ball back to the referee. I mean, I love Barry Sanders. Barry Sanders did amazing things, and I'm glad that I got to see him. That was actually at least 3 of my first NFL games that I attended in person were Detroit Lions games on Thanksgiving, because my dad got free tickets, and they were terrible seats. They were like directly behind the goalposts on Thanksgiving. And some of those games, like, they weren't even full. Like, the stadium, I guess it makes sense. Like, it was super cold some year, and, it's like you want to be at home with your family. Do you really want to, in the 90s, go to see the Lions play at the Silver Dome? But hey, it's Barry Sanders. But anyway, I'm off the track. Barry Sanders, amazing football player, not that much of an entertainer. Like, hand the ball back to the referee. And there's definitely something to be said for that. If that's your personality, you just have to go with it. But Chad let his personality, and Chad let all of his personality out on the field and in his celebrations, in the interviews, in the locker room. He really gave us, obviously he held some of himself back, but he really gave us as raw as you're going to get for an NFL player, I should say. So that really drew me to the Bengals and that team, and really got me excited, because at the time I was living in Chicago, and everybody was like, "Oh, Chicago Bears, the Bears, we got Bernard Berry and Rex Grossman." And I mean, Matt Forte was pretty good, but I just couldn't get into the Bears. I just couldn't do it. So I was following the Bengals, and of course I was heartbroken that game against the Steelers. You know what happened, but that really crystallized for me that I could never, ever root for the Steelers again, no matter what childhood allegiance I may have had growing up as a little a-hole kid. I could never, ever again feel anything but hate for the Steelers. So, yeah, anyway. Then, obviously we had the era of Andy Dalton and AJ Green, Marvin Lewis, going to the playoffs all those years. It was a fun ride, I guess you'd say. It would have been better if we could have won at least one of those games and not have it all ripped away. I don't know which Steelers game was worse, the 2015 game or 2009. They were both really, really painful, but we got through it. If you were there, if you're not, if you weren't there, just, that's good. That's good. You don't have the scars yet. But you know what? Come along with me, friend, listener. Let me take you on a journey. Before I forget, one of the other things that this podcast is not going to be about, that a lot of other podcasts may be about, is gambling. I'm not a gambler. I've never been a gambler. Gambling is not the primary reason why I follow the game. I just love watching football. I love watching football games. I love watching the interviews with the players, seeing what they're doing, what they're going through, just the daily life. Because, that's, like I said, that's growing up. These football players were my heroes. These were the people that I looked up to. And now, it's kind of weird being a grown man. Like, I can't be like, idolizing people who are, I'm not going to say how much younger, but much younger than me. It feels weird. Back when I was kind of like I said, like the same age as these guys, it was a lot cooler. Now that I'm in the kind of like Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady kind of part of my career, it's kind of a little bit less realistic for me to say like, oh yeah, I could still play. I could still get out there. Like, no, I definitely could not have any chance of making a comeback. And, it's like, oh, maybe if I just, kids, earmuffs, maybe if I just took steroids and I could just get back out there and train really hard. These guys make a lot of money. Like, I don't know, maybe it's worth it. No, but yeah, now the time for my football career has passed. Like I said, I've never coached anything in my life. I don't think I'd be good at it. I don't have the patience. I would just yell. I would just yell at the people and be like, you suck. This is no good. You're doing it wrong. So I can't do that. So I've got all this interest in the Bengals, in football. And unfortunately, my dad is not here with us anymore. So I can't share that love of the game that he had and, that I really got from him. So I need to share this with somebody. They say if you've got a skill, use it. Don't just let it go to waste. So I feel like, unfortunately, all my friends, when I try to talk to them, hopefully none of them are listening right now, but if they are, hello. But, when I try to talk to my friends about football, and especially about the Bengals, they'll play along a little bit, but, I'm too into it for them to really have a conversation, and I get a little bit peeved off. Like, my friend, I'll talk to him, and he'll send me the headlines, but, he doesn't click into the actual story and read the story. So I promise you, the listener, I'm never going to react to the headlines of anything. If I ever react or have analysis of a story, I'm going to try to do some due diligence, actually find out what was actually said by whom. I'll try to give you a source and not just say, oh, I heard somewhere on the internet that somebody's getting traded. I'm never going to say that. So I'm trying to give you some real unvarnished opinions, but I'm also going to cover the game diligently. I'm not going to fall asleep. I'm the type of person, if you're the type of person who plans your sleeping schedule around the NFL football game schedule and kickoff times, this podcast might be for you, because that's what I do. When I was growing up, again, I'm so old. I'm dating myself like left and right every single time. But when I was growing up, Monday Night Football didn't start at 8 or 8:30 or whatever it is. It started at 9. So you had to take a nap. You had to take a nap if you were going to make it through Monday Night Football. There was no way you could make it through unless you're like drinking coffee or something. You had to take the preemptive nap. So if you're a football fan and you're hardcore, you got to plan. You can't fall asleep. Sometimes I message my friend like, oh, did you see that play? And then 3 hours later, oh, I just woke up. I was asleep. Like, what? You cannot be sleeping through the game. You have to be awake. If it matters to you, you'll make it happen, okay? So I'm just letting you know that's the type of fan that I am. And if that's the type of thing that's going to interest you, you might like this podcast. So what is this podcast going to be about? Well, obviously we're going to do news, signings, roster transactions, waiver wires, new coaches, hires or fires or whatever. But also we're going to check out the preseason schedule, the season preview. We're going to do a little preseason primer coming up next episode. But we're going to do weekly game previews. Going to check all the different matchups, any injuries, any bulletin board material, as they call it, anybody talking trash over social media. We're going to cover it. We're also going to then break down the game, watching it with our eyes and actually having thoughts and opinions. Now, one thing that's different about this show is I try to stay off social media as much as possible and not get my opinions and my takes from anybody else. So I might not have a popular opinion, or it might not be the fan consensus, or it may not be what everybody else is talking about on their podcast. And that's okay. And you may disagree with what I'm saying, or you may think it's completely off base, and that's okay too. It's healthy to have disagreements. And I want your feedback as the listener. Anything that you want to hear on this show, anything that would make this show better, to improve it, let me know. I want to hear your constructive criticism. If you're just going to tell me like to stop doing the podcast and shut up and I'm stupid and I should die, well, then I probably won't take that criticism under advisement as much. But hey, I'm just a guy doing a podcast for your enjoyment. I'm trying very hard not to have any ads or sponsorships in this. I'm not going to inject any advertisement into this show. If there is an ad, I apologize in advance. I didn't put it there. My bad. But sometimes things happen with these podcast hosts and distributing things. They just sneak the ads in. Like all of a sudden I could be mid-sentence, boom, ad. You don't even know. So be on your heads, or keep your heads up, I should say, or be on your toes. Don't be on your heads. If you're on your heads, then something has gone wrong. But stay on your toes, I should say. Dude, it was so crazy. Off topic. I was listening to a podcast and all of a sudden a Spanish ad all of a sudden came on. I was like, whoa. Did I switch to Telemundo all of a sudden? That was kind of strange. I mean, I guess we're mixing it up now. We're multicultural, but it's an English podcast. So anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent here. Now, how can you get me on the socials, as they say, I think? I don't know. X or Twitter or whatever it is. This is kind of this is going to be like a time capsule podcast where we're still not sure what we're calling this thing, but I'm Bengal Bites over there. I'm on Instagram, Bengal Bites Podcast. I'm going to try to get this podcast up to as many different places and distribute it and put it out to as many different places as I can. But I just wanted to do this initial first episode to get it out there, get the ball rolling on this thing before the season starts. I was thinking about doing a podcast to begin last season, but it really felt like since the Bengals had just been in the Super Bowl, it felt like a bandwagon type of thing to do. And I didn't want anybody to accuse me of jumping on the bandwagon. Oh, here come the Bengals. They were just in the Super Bowl. Now I'm going to start a podcast. I don't want to do that. So now we're starting 2023. Let's go. If you love football, if you want to enjoy the Bengals and the NFL league in general with me, come along on this podcast. So I'll just leave you with Hoo Day, and remember, stay hungry for the next Bengal Bites.